This happened to me when I was about 11 years old. It was the 90s. I have lived my whole life in El Paso, Texas. The culture is rich in folklore and religious beliefs. Many Hispanic families have stories of the paranormal. One legend popular is the legend of the Weeping Woman, also known as La Llorona. The legend of La Llorona, Spanish for the Weeping Woman, has been a part of Hispanic culture in the Southwest since the days of the conquistadors. The tall, thin spirit is said to be blessed with natural beauty and long flowing black hair. Wearing a white gown, she roams the rivers and creeks, wailing into the night and searching for children to drag, screaming to a watery grave. No one really knows when the legend of La Llorona began or from where it originated. Though the tales vary from source to source, the one common thread is that she is the spirit of a doomed mother who drowned her children and now spends eternity searching for them in rivers and lakes. One night, just like any other night, I lived in a trailer with my mom and dad. My youngest brother was staying with my aunt this night. I fell asleep watching Jay Leno as usual, and when I woke up I was on the sofa in my living room. The time was 4:00 a.m., which was illuminated from the stove in the kitchen. The television was off and normally I had a light on, but this time it was pitch black. I woke up and I heard a horrible screaming that was coming from far in the distance. The screaming was coming from a ditch that was a few feet away from my home. I heard it, and I thought I was hearing things. I asked myself, am I dreaming? Then I started to hear the animals outside howling and whimpering. These animals that I speak of are cats and dogs. As the screaming got closer, the animals continued to cry. The screaming was something I have never experienced before. It sounded like I was in a big hallway, and a woman was screaming her guts out down that hallway. Then in all the screaming, I started to make out words. These words being said by whoever this was at 4 a.m. screaming their guts out shocked me. The woman said, "Hey, mis hijos, oh my children." In a huge panic, I quickly got up from the sofa and ran to the kitchen, which was right next to where I was asleep. I turned the closest light and looked around. The screaming didn't stop. In fact, the screaming only got louder and closer. I questioned my sanity at that moment. Was I going crazy or hearing things? Then I thought to myself, this is real, and the animals are responding to it in a native way. So I did what any other 11-year-old boy would do in a moment like this. I ran to my mom and dad's room. I reached for my mom and shook her awake wildly. She woke up slowly, and to my amazement, the screaming faded away as she woke awake. I thought to myself, what the heck is going on? I told my mother, "Mom, do you hear that screaming and crying lady?" My mom was half asleep when she said, "Go back to sleep. It is most likely just your imagination." I told her, "No, this is real, please listen. Don't you hear her?" My mom quickly just said, "You are dreaming. So go back to sleep, it's going to be okay." By then, the screaming had faded long away, as if whoever was screaming knew that the adults were awake. I was terrified as I returned to the living room, and quickly turned on the television as I left most of the lights on as well. I didn't go back to sleep until the sun came up. I couldn't believe what I heard and witnessed. I was treated like a crazy person whenever I told my story. It got so bad that I kept my experience to myself. To this day, I don't care what people think of my experience. I know what I heard. A couple of years later, it happened to me again. This story takes place after the first incident with the woman known as La Llorona. Not much happened after the first time I heard her. An incident occurred with my aunt about a year after my encounter. According to my aunt, they were sleeping and suddenly there was a horrible sound coming from the ditch located in front of their house. There is a street in between the ditch and the house, but her house and the ditch are really close to one another. It was about 2:30 a.m. when my aunt was awakened by a screaming woman coming from the ditch. She figured maybe somebody was being hurt or attacked. She walked out to the front yard, looking towards the ditch, and saw there was no woman. My cousin, her daughter, walked out the front as well, asking what was happening. My aunt, of course, had no idea as the screaming grew closer. Then they saw her, a woman in a white dress. The only thing that shook them to the bone was the woman had no feet and was clearly floating. One other feature that threw them off was that this woman had no face. They both just turned after seeing that and ran inside their house. My aunt locked the door and called the police. The police showed up minutes later and took their claims seriously. El Paso PD was soon looking at the area where this woman was seen and heard screaming. The police soon returned and said there was no evidence that a woman was there. They looked at the area where the woman was seen walking and not even footprints were found. One of the police officers even asked if maybe my aunt was dreaming of everything that happened. The next day, I went over to visit and saw my cousin like I had never seen her before. She had black bags under her eyes, and she hasn't slept since the incident. I asked her what happened, and she said she saw what my aunt saw. The screaming woman with no feet and no face. It took her a while to sleep normal again. She never heard or saw La Llorona again. But to this day, she won't deny that she witnessed something that she can't explain. Unlike my cousin, I don't have the luck of avoiding La Llorona. It was in the early 2000s when I worked here in El Paso, Texas at a local supermarket named Big 8. One of the shifts that I worked was from 3 a.m. to 12 p.m. This store was located in the lower valley of El Paso. In the back of the store is a small ditch. One early morning at about 4 a.m. I had the back doors open, and I was taking the empty milk crates outside in the back. I was working with two other guys at the time of this incident. One of the guys named Randy thought it would be funny to close the back doors and lock me outside as a joke. When I heard the doors close shut, I knew he was just messing around. I thought to myself, I will just stay quiet and wait for him to open the doors again. I wasn't going to give in to his joke of trying to scare me. I stood by the doors smiling and thinking to myself, he is not going to scare me. I could hear Randy laughing on the other side of the doors. I thought to myself, well, the joke is on him because I am not scared. About 1 minute later in the far distance I heard screaming. I heard, ah. And I thought to myself, it's the same screaming that I heard when I was 11 years old. The screaming got louder and closer to me. I felt a chill down my spine, and I felt that I was being watched by some unseen force. I felt a sense of hopelessness. It was a feeling unlike any other. I started pounding on the door. I yelled, let me in. There is somebody out here. I pounded my fists and started kicking the door. What the fuck? Let me in. I could hear Randy laughing on the other side of the door. I started to kick the door harder. The screaming was now coming from right in back of me. Just then, Randy opened the door and said, what the fuck is that? Just then, I ran inside and locked the warehouse door. Randy said, why was that lady screaming? Did she need help? I told him that I don't think that was a lady. I told him what had happened to me when I was younger. Randy told me, don't you think maybe you are cursed or she is following you? I stayed quiet when he told me that. I couldn't work my shift normally after that. It took a few hours to get over what happened. I admit I was scared, and maybe Randy was right. What if she was following me? There is one more incident that took place right after. In 2015, I started working as a custodian at Cedar Grove Elementary. Behind the school is the border highway. Then the Rio Grande, of course, is covered by a huge metal fence that separates Mexico from El Paso. I worked the night shift from 2:30 p.m. to 11 p.m. One night, I was stuck working with another custodian until midnight. We did a walkthrough of the school to make sure all the doors are locked on the outside. I worked with another custodian named Clark. Clark always told me that he has never believed in ghosts. Up until that night, I can say. We walked to our cars, and just as I was about to leave, I saw that Clark had opened the hood of his car. Then he asked me, hey Justin, can you give me a jump? My car battery is dead. I told him yes, of course. Just as I stepped out of my car, a loud screaming came from the Rio Grande. All the animals in the nearby neighborhood started howling and crying. Once again, the screaming resembled a woman screaming her guts out in a hallway as it echoed all over. Clark looked at me and said, Oh my God, is that a demon? I told him, no, Clark. That is La Llorona. He looked right at me and said, no way, she can't be real. Then I said, I have heard her before. Then Clark said, hurry please, and let's get out of here. I gave him a jump, and just then we saw a border patrol jeep speeding towards the screaming woman. Just then I thought to myself, I can record this and share it with the world. I took my phone out, and just as I hit record, the screaming faded away. Clark and I looked at each other, and he said, what the f***? Sorry, Justin, I'm leaving before that evil witch comes back to get us. We both left, and the very next day Clark was telling everybody at work how he heard the witch crying the night before. That was the last time I encountered her. I don't think it is the last, as I feel that she may choose who hears her or sees her. I have other paranormal stories, as I was a part of a group here in El Paso, Texas. We have investigated many historical locations. I also got the chance to investigate with Amy Bruni and other celebrities that have visited El Paso. That is a whole other story for another day. Thank you for listening, and in time I will have more of my stories posted. Never fear.